Language is a bridge between people who cannot otherwise reach each other, between a person in crisis and the system that might help them, between the truth someone carries and the world that needs to hear it. For 22 years, Fatima al-Rashidi had been that bridge. A court-certified Arabic interpreter working in London's legal system, police stations, magistrates' courts, crown courts, translating the most consequential conversations in people's lives. When someone was arrested, when someone was charged, when someone faced a jury. She was 51 years old in November 2017 when she was arrested herself. The charge was perverting the course of justice. The allegation was that she had deliberately mistranslated a defendant's statement during a police interview in a way that had helped secure a false confession, that she had translated words the defendant had not said and omitted words he had. Fatima had not done this. The defendant in question, a young Iraqi man named Samir Hassan, had genuinely said what the police interview record said he had said. The allegation against her was constructed by a defense attorney who had decided, after his client's conviction, that challenging the interpretation was a more viable route to appeal than challenging the evidence. She spent 2 years fighting a prosecution built on the word of a convicted man's lawyer against her 22-year professional record. She was convicted. She served 14 months. And then an audio recording that the prosecution had not disclosed, a recording of the original interview that had been made by the interview room's backup system, was found during an unrelated audit. The recording proved clearly and completely that Fatima had translated accurately. This is the story of an interpreter whose entire professional identity was built on the precise and faithful movement of words between languages, and of the specific cruelty of accusing such a person of the one thing their entire career had been devoted to not doing. Fatima al-Rashidi had come to England from Jordan in 1992 as a young woman of 26 following a husband who had been offered a position at a London university. The marriage had ended by 1998, but England had not. She had built her life here, had become a citizen, had raised her 2 children here, had woven herself into the fabric of a city that, at its best, makes space for people who arrive and stay and contribute. She had discovered interpreting through a community legal center in Hackney, where she had volunteered in her early years in London, translating for Arabic-speaking clients who were navigating housing and immigration issues. A solicitor there had suggested she pursue formal court certification. She had. She had passed the assessments on her first attempt, which is not common. She had spent 22 years in London's legal system. She had interpreted in police stations across the Metropolitan Police area, in magistrates' courts and crown courts from Snaresbrook to the Old Bailey. She had sat beside the frightened and the guilty and the innocent and the confused and had given them, as faithfully as language allows, the words of the people who held authority over their futures. She was known in the interpreter community as exceptionally precise. Her colleagues described her as someone who would stop mid-interpretation to ask a speaker to clarify an ambiguity rather than render it in a way that introduced error. She was slow because she was careful. She was careful because she understood what was at stake. She had no complaints on her professional record. In 22 years, she had been the subject of 3 brief queries, standard in her field, all of which had been resolved in her favor. Samir Hassan had been a defendant in a money laundering case in 2015. Fatima had been assigned as his interpreter for his police interview. The interview had lasted 4 hours. Samir had been convicted. He had appealed. His appeal solicitor had reviewed the interview transcript and had decided that the interpretation was challengeable. The appeal solicitor's name was Barry Nichols. He had been practicing criminal defense for 31 years. He had read the transcript of Samir Hassan's police interview and had identified, he believed, discrepancies between what Samir said in Arabic, as Barry had had it reviewed by an independent Arabic speaker, and what appeared in the English transcript. The independent Arabic review that Barry had commissioned was conducted by a bilingual university student, not a certified interpreter, not someone with experience in legal interpretation, but someone whose Arabic was good and who had reviewed the transcript as a general linguistic exercise. The student had noted several places where the English transcript did not match the Arabic as she understood it. Some of these differences were the kind that arise naturally from interpretation, the imprecision of moving between languages, the difference between literal and idiomatic equivalents, the normal gaps that exist between what someone says and how it appears in a translated record. Some of the differences were more significant, or appeared to be, to Barry Nichols and to his client. Barry submitted the review to the court as part of Samir's appeal. He did not stop there. He made a formal complaint to the Metropolitan Police about Fatima's conduct as an interpreter. He alleged that she had deliberately mistranslated key statements in a way that had assisted the prosecution. He used the word deliberate. He used the word corrupt. These are serious words. They are the kinds of words that, once applied to a professional in a public legal filing, do damage that cannot be fully undone even if they are later found to be wrong. The Metropolitan Police investigated the complaint. They reviewed the transcript. They consulted their own language expert. They decided to charge Fatima. What they did not do, and this is the fact that makes the prosecution so difficult to understand in retrospect, is listen to the backup recording. The interview room had a secondary recording system installed in 2013 as part of a Metropolitan Police pilot program. The system had been running during Samir Hassan's interview in 2015. The recording existed. It was in a digital archive. Nobody checked it. The trial of Fatima al-Rashidi opened at Southwark Crown Court in April 2019. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case rested on the transcript analysis, the comparison between the Arabic and the English, and on the expert testimony of a certified Arabic interpreter named Dr. Khalid Mansour, who had reviewed the transcript and found what he described as significant discrepancies consistent with deliberate mistranslation. The defense engaged their own Arabic interpretation expert, who found the same discrepancies but characterized them differently, as the kind of interpretive variation that exists within acceptable professional practice, rather than as evidence of deliberate corruption. Two experts, opposite characterizations of the same material. The jury again faced the specific difficulty of evaluating highly technical linguistic evidence without the tools to make that evaluation. Fatima testified. She was precise and detailed. She described her approach to the Hassan interview, the pace she had set, the clarifications she had sought, the specific decisions she had made at points where the Arabic was ambiguous. She described her 22-year record. She said she had never in her career deliberately mistranslated a word. The prosecution suggested that her precision and her 22-year record were precisely why her corruption, if it had occurred, would have been difficult to detect. That a dishonest interpreter with her experience would know how to construct a mistranslation that appeared professional. This is an argument that cannot be countered from the inside. Any evidence of competence becomes, under this framing, evidence of sophisticated dishonesty. The jury deliberated for 8 days. They found Fatima al-Rashidi guilty of perverting the course of justice. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison. She was 53 years old. She had spent 22 years giving people their voice in the legal system. She had now been convicted of corrupting the very process she had devoted her career to serving. She said nothing when the verdict was read. There were no words she could find in any language that were adequate to what she felt. Fatima entered HMP Wrongful in Surrey in May 2019. She was the second person in these stories to enter that facility. The first, Patricia Osei, the social worker from episode 21, had been there 2 years earlier. Fatima was in prison largely silent, not in the way of depression or defeat, but in the way of someone who has chosen not to spend words in an environment that does not deserve them. She worked in the prison kitchen. She attended the chapel. She read. She wrote long letters to her children, a son in his late 20s who worked in data science, a daughter in her mid-20s who was training as a nurse. Her children visited monthly. They were, by her account, more angry than she was, the specific anger of young adults watching an injustice happen to someone they love and being unable to stop it. She counseled them, from her visits, to channel the anger into something useful rather than something destructive. She said, "Your anger is right. What you do with it is what matters." She continued to fight. She and her solicitor filed an appeal in September 2019. The appeal was based on the inadequacy of the prosecution's interpretation expert, arguing that the characterization of the discrepancies as deliberate rather than professional had not been established to the required standard. The appeal was refused in January 2020. Then, in March 2020, a Metropolitan Police Digital Evidence Unit was conducting a routine audit of its archive systems, part of a broader program of digital governance that had been recommended following an HMC PSI inspection. The auditor assigned to the 2015 to 2016 section of the archive was systematically cataloging recordings from interview rooms. She found, in the archive, a recording labeled with the Hassan interview date and reference number. It was from the secondary backup system. It was complete. It had been there since 2015. She flagged it as potentially relevant to an active case. The backup recording was reviewed by the Metropolitan Police Language Unit within 2 weeks of its discovery. What the recording contained was 4 hours of the Hassan interview, from beginning to end, unedited, with both the Arabic and the English clearly audible. A certified court interpreter engaged by the Metropolitan Police, not Fatima and not any of the experts involved in the original trial, listened to the recording and compared it against the transcript that had been produced from the primary recording system. Her finding was unambiguous. Fatima al-Rashidi's interpretation was accurate throughout the interview. The discrepancies identified by Barry Nichols's student reviewer and by the prosecution's expert were the result of the primary recording system having captured some of the audio at a lower quality in certain sections, quality that was sufficient for the transcription that had been made, but that, when compared against the clearer backup audio, revealed that the transcription itself had minor inaccuracies that were not the interpreter's doing. Fatima had not mistranslated anything. The transcript, not the interpretation, had introduced the discrepancies. And the transcript had been produced by a court transcription service, not by Fatima. The recording was provided to Fatima's solicitor in April 2020. The solicitor listened to it in his office. Then he called Fatima. She was still in prison. He said, "Fatima, we have the recording. It proves everything. You're going to come home." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Play it to me." He played it over the phone. She sat in the prison phone area and listened to her own voice from 2015, translating accurately and carefully, word by word, across 4 hours. Doing exactly what she had said she had done. Doing exactly what she had spent 22 years doing. She said, "Yes. That is what happened." She said nothing else for a long time. The Criminal Cases Review Commission received the case in May 2020, referred by Fatima's solicitor with the recording and the new interpretation analysis. The CCRC reviewed it over 3 months. In August 2020, the CCRC referred the case to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal heard the case in October 2020. The Crown Prosecution Service, reviewing the recording, acknowledged immediately that it fundamentally undermined the conviction. They did not oppose the appeal. The conviction was quashed in October 2020. Fatima had already been released on bail in June 2020 pending the appeal, having served 14 months of her sentence. She walked out of HMP Braunfield in June 2020 on a warm morning, her daughter and son both present. The children she had counseled to use their anger usefully were there with their arms open. She held them for a long time. Then she said, in Arabic to both of them at once, something that her daughter later described as the closest thing to a prayer she had ever heard her mother say. A sentence that translated, imperfectly as all translation is imperfect, as something like, "The truth was always the same. It was just waiting to be heard." When asked later what she had meant, Fatima said, "I meant that I knew what I had done. I knew I had translated correctly. And I knew that somewhere, in some form, the proof of that existed. Because things that are true do not disappear. They wait." She paused. She said, "I waited with it." The Metropolitan Police issued a statement acknowledging that the backup recording should have been identified and disclosed before the trial. The statement described this as a significant failure and committed to a review of disclosure procedures for secondary recording systems. Barry Nichols, the solicitor whose complaint had initiated the prosecution, was referred to the Solicitor's Regulation Authority. The SRA investigated his conduct in commissioning a non-certified language reviewer and making serious allegations against a professional interpreter on the basis of that review. The SRA found concerns about his practice and imposed a fine. He was not struck off. He continues to practice. Dr. Khalid Mansour, the prosecution's interpretation expert, was not disciplined. His characterization of the discrepancies as deliberate had been, in the view of the regulatory body, a professional opinion formed in good faith on the evidence available to him at the time. Fatima al-Rashidi received compensation from the government for her wrongful conviction. She did not comment publicly on the amount. She returned to interpretation work. Not immediately. There was a process of recertification and a period in which she chose not to work while she readjusted. But she returned. In September 2021, she walked into Snaresbrook Crown Court with her interpreter's lanyard and her certified ID and sat down in the interpreter's box and did what she had always done. Her colleagues in the interpreter community had organized a formal welcome back. She asked them not to. She said, "I just want to work." The work is the point. Let me just work. She is 58 years old. She has been interpreting for 30 years now, 22 before her arrest, 1 year suspended during prosecution and trial, 2 years imprisoned and appealing, and 7 since. She says the experience changed what she understands about language and law. Not in ways that make her better at the technical work. She was already as good as she could be at that. But in what she understands about what the work means. About what it means to stand between a person and the system that holds authority over them, and to be the only thing connecting those two things. She says, I understood before that it was serious. I understood that getting it wrong had consequences. But I understood that the way you understand something you have been told. Now I understand it, the way you understand something you have lived. She says, every word I translate now carries the weight of what happened. That makes me slower sometimes. It makes me more careful. I stop more often. I check more things. Some of my colleagues find this excessive. She says, they have not been where I have been. She picks up her headphones. She goes back to work. The words keep moving. Between the people who need them and the system that needs to hear them. That is what she does. That is what she has always done.